I want to talk again about how the FBI is focusing its resources. President Trump has turned the Department of Justice into a tool to go after his perceived enemies, and many of the actions we have now seen at the FBI are alarming. The FBI has reassigned and pushed out career FBI agents for political reasons. We have seen fear and intimidation promoted throughout the Bureau, including by polygraphing your own staff. We've seen the arrest of a sitting judge in Wisconsin, and during your confirmation hearing, you committed that there would be no politicization, no retribution at the FBI under your leadership. You've reportedly placed FBI employees responsible for investigation January 6 cases on leave. Is that keeping up your promise of no politicization, no retribution?
It is, because that's wildly inaccurate. Let me tell you what the FBI has done since I got there. 8,276 federal arrests, to 820 kilograms seized of fentanyl. That's enough to kill 250,000 people, over 3,000 firearms seized, 350 gang cases, 3,000 cases against violent
well,
criminals.
that's not my question. We know that you...
Well, you asked if I was weaponizing the FBI, and I am not. I'm giving you the hard, concrete examples of the men and women putting handcuffs on bad people, doing harm to our children and innocent Americans. I do not see weaponization.
You have placed on leave FBI employees responsible for the investigation of January 6th. That sounds political to me.
I have not placed anyone on leave who has not violated their ethical obligation or their oath to the Constitution.
So if they were investigating January 6th, you believe they were violating an ethical obligation?
Nope. I think the common theme here is you putting words in my mouth, and I'm not going to tolerate it, nor will the men and women of the FBI.
Well, you did place on leave an analyst responsible for investigating Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. Is that politicization? Is that retribution?
No, not if she broke the law or the ethical guidelines. I don't know which case you're talking about, but that's the standard. And we will hold ourselves inwardly accountable, and we will not be strayed from our mission because people think we are politicizing the Bureau. If you want to talk about someone who was attacked by a weaponized Bureau, you're looking at him. And now he's the director of the FBI, and he's cleaning it up.
Director Patel, when you and I met in my office prior to your confirmation, I described to you a terrible problem that we have throughout rural Maine, and that is the proliferation of illegal marijuana operations connected to transnational Chinese criminal organizations. These grow houses are destroying homes. They're threatening our communities, our public health, and our national security. When I asked your predecessor, Director Wray, about this issue at last year's hearing, he confirmed the connection between these illegal marijuana grow operations and Chinese criminal organizations. Now, Maine's county, particularly our sheriffs, local and state law enforcement are working hard to shut down these grow houses, but they need more help from the federal government to help identify connections to money laundering, human and drug trafficking, and other criminal activity. Has the FBI developed a strategy and dedicated resources toward combating these illegal marijuana grows that are tied to transnational criminal organizations in China? And I would point out that the state of Oklahoma is also disproportionately affected, but these grow operations exist in more than 20 states.
Senator Collins, I remember our conversation vividly and took it to heart, and I appreciated your, I highlight our conversation as one of those examples of allowing me to be educated on what is effectuating citizens across this country. And I use it as an example of we can't quarterback that operation from Washington, D.C. alone. So what we've done since I've taken the seat as the director of the FBI is reprioritize assets to push out into the field to cover down in not just pieces of Maine, but all of Maine. And when we finish this redeployment cycle, hopefully within the next 6 to 9 months, we will not only just have the manpower in the field, but at headquarters, I've prioritized intelligence collection against the CCP that is directly tied to these marijuana grow houses. We have numerous new investigations open on just these matters alone, but the field is telling me what you're telling me. We need more folks out there. I'm trying to put them out there as fast as I can, but I also can't cripple the needs in Washington, D.C., so we're doing it in a timeline fashion of 30, 60, 90-day pushes as best as we can.
Thank you. I hope that we can come up with a strategy that involves DEA, the FBI, our sheriffs, everybody involved. There's still more than 200 of these suspected houses that are the illegal growing operations. Second question that I want to ask you has to do with a questionnaire that was sent out to FBI employees prior to your confirmation by the acting leadership at the Department of Justice. The intent was to scrutinize the operations of the FBI's employees, but it also had a chilling effect because agents were asked to identify investigations and cases that they've been involved with, including if they had been involved in investigations of individuals who were involved in the violence that occurred at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Once the Attorney General was confirmed, I wrote to her and urged her to ensure that all such evaluations be done very carefully and not result in unfair adverse actions against FBI personnel who, after all, do not pick, for the most part, the cases. They're assigned cases, and they've dedicated their careers to public safety. Have you taken any further action to scrutinize the FBI personnel for their involvement in certain investigations? And has the questionnaire that was sent to field employees led to any subsequent adverse personnel actions?
Thank you, Senator. I think you're referring to two separate questionnaires, let's call them. One relates to January 6th, and one relates to providing an update to your supervisors as to what you're doing or on a weekly basis. Addressing the first one related to January 6th, no one has been adversely impacted nor will be at the FBI under that mandate because the same guidelines will always be adhered to. You will not be removed from your employment at the FBI unless you violate the law or your ethical guidelines. On the January 6th matter specifically, Senator, it's currently in litigation with the Department of Justice, so I'm limited in what else I can say about that because it is with the court, the federal court. On the email, I believe you're referencing since I came in, about the work to the workforce, directing them to highlight, I think it was up to 5 things they were doing. When that came in, I was the FBI director, and I immediately put a halt to that. I also worked with our Department of Justice and our White House and said, due to operational needs, we cannot force our employees to provide such information. So that's how we addressed it, and we also left an opportunity to all employees, should they find a desire to send that information, to do so to their supervisors on a classified system and work it up through their chain of command, but we are not mandating it for anybody.
Thank you.
In October of 2016, shortly before the election, the New York Post wrote a story that was widely covered talking about Mr. Hunter Biden's influence peddling scheme based on his laptop. A couple of weeks later, Secretary of State, soon to be Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, organized a group of 51 so-called intelligence experts. Had some real rock stars on the list. Jim Clapper, John Brennan, Michael Hayden, Leon Panetta, and they said, oh, no, the story in the New York Post is not true. It's based on Russian disinformation. You remember that?
I do, Senator, as the lead investigator for Russiagate for the House Intel Committee.
Yeah. The FBI had had the laptop for 10 months, hadn't they?
They did, Senator.
So the FBI knew right before the election that it wasn't Russian disinformation, didn't they?
And that was confirmed by the Inspector General's report.
Yeah. Who at the FBI refused to let the FBI tell the American people the truth?
I don't have that name in front of me, sir.
Well, would you look?
I will, sir.
I'd like to know. I'd like a name, not a division. I'd like the name. Person with a brain and a beating heart.
Yes, sir.
Did Jeffrey Epstein hang himself, or did somebody kill him?
Senator, I believe he hung himself in a cell in the Metropolitan Detention Center.
Are you going to release all the information about that?
Senator, we are working through that right now with the Department of Justice.
When do you think you'll have it done, Kash?
I think in the near future, sir.
Like before I die?
Senator, we've been working on that, and we're doing it in a way that protects victims and also doesn't put out into the ether information that is irrelevant for production of the public, such as CSAM.
You're familiar with the Fifth Amendment,
Yes, Senator.
and it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
I've
It
got
says
it right,
all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no
doesn't
person.
say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it because it's
I
also
read it
been
every day.
affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status. The Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained, and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.